Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Fraud Watch, Protecting Construction Credit from Scams and Schemes. This webinar is hosted by Handle's Building Blocks community. My name is Lori Drake, and I am the Building Blocks community manager. For anyone that's new to Handle, we do have a platform that is purposely built for building material suppliers. We help you with managing lien rights, research jobs and bonds, stay compliant with waivers, and streamline your payment process through a dedicated payment portal. Please stay tuned after this webinar. We're going to show you a quick sneak peek at one of Handle's most popular features. While I've got you, I'm excited to finally announce a save the date. We are hosting our first Handle annual conference, February 11th through 13th at a 5-star resort in Vegas, the Venetian Hotel. We have the rates at under $200 a night. It'll be 3 days packed with industry insights, expert speakers, and the kind of networking you just can't get online. So if you'd like to be first in line to get the details or get on our registration list, please send me an email and we'll get you those details. For your convenience, I will be sending an email after this event. It'll include a copy of this recording as well as the center slides for your convenience so that you can revisit them at any time. And as always, I will be managing the chat box. So should you have any questions during the presentation, please drop them in there and I'll keep an eye on it throughout the event and relay those to the speaker as we go. But we will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation as well. Oh, let's go back one more. I am excited to welcome Chris Singh and Samantha Riggen. They're with Gibbs, Giden, Locher, Turner, Senet, Wittbrodt, LLP. Chris is the firm's managing partner, an adjunct professor at both Pepperdine and Cal State, and a published author in multiple construction law publications. He's been recognized as a super lawyer regularly since 2009, an honor given to less than 2.5% of the attorneys in California. Samantha is a partner at the firm as well, also a published author, and has been recognized in Best Lawyers in America for 2023 and 2024. She's presented at NACM National, CMA, and other leading construction law conferences. Both Chris and Samantha have been amazing supporters of the Building Blocks community, joining us for past webinars as well as presenting at our live events. I couldn't be more excited to welcome you both back, and I will let you take it from here.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks for having us. We appreciate it. As Lori said, Sam and I are partners here at Gibbs Giden. We have 6 offices, 4 in California, Los Angeles, Irvine, San Jose, and Westlake Village, Las Vegas, Nevada, and our new office in Scottsdale, Arizona. And as most of you or some of you know, we represent and serve the construction industry, but we also are a full-service law firm representing our clients in all their business, corporate, transactional, real estate, and commercial code issues. And one of the topics we're talking about today is one that's near and dear to our heart, and one that I know Sam deals with on a daily basis. So it's not one that's covered a lot, but I think it's super important, especially in this day and age, because we are seeing these sorts of things that we're talking about today on a daily basis, to be honest. We've got stacks of files on our desk, and so much of it is some of the stuff that you may have heard of before or dealing with yourself, but also just as important, things to be on the lookout for, hopefully giving you some takeaways so that if and when you spot some of these schemes, you're able to nip them in the bud and hopefully save your organization quite a bit of money. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I'm sure you're all dealing with these types of issues, not just in your professional lives, but your personal lives as well. I know I get text messages and emails, and both my work email and personal email very regularly. So we all know that fraudulent activity is on the rise, especially, with AI becoming more and more common, more and more popular, more and more powerful. There are AI-powered voice and deep fake videos impersonating legitimate organizations, for example, maybe your bank, the IRS, other government agencies, and they're all intended to trick you to paying a fake fee or providing account information. Sometimes they'll impersonate someone you know and trust and ask for donations or personal information. And there's phishing schemes out there that are not only on the rise, but those are getting more and more sophisticated and tricky to spot. So as I said, pretty much on a weekly basis, I know I'm getting emails and text messages asking me to click on a link, update my information. Most recently, I got a text message about a toll road bill, and I rarely use toll roads, but I had recently used one, and that one, it was pretty suspicious looking, but it almost got me just because the timing of it was so coincidental. So just like in our personal lives, fraud in the construction industry, it isn't rare, and it's growing and it's getting stronger. And all of you here today, credit teams, you're often the first and last line of defense for your companies. You're on the front line, and you're often in the best position to detect suspicious activity before a loss occurs, because once materials leave your warehouse, sorry, I'm trying to click through the slides here. There we go. Once materials leave your yard, the recovery options significantly narrow. And I wanted to talk a bit about why specifically construction credit is vulnerable and why scammers would choose to target the construction industry. So there are some characteristics about construction credit that make it a prime target for these multi-layer transactions and construction projects. Create many opportunities for fraud through things like phantom invoices and fake vendor schemes. These schemes flourish and go undetected until it's too late. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay with the slides here, so it's hard to see which one I land on. I go back. As I do long complex payment chains, owner to general contractor to subcontractor to supplier, that complex payment create a lot of opportunity for these fraud schemes. Another reason construction is vulnerable is because materials are delivered before payment is received. Most of your customers are payment terms like net 30 or purchases on credit, whatever the specific payment terms may be. And also materials are not always delivered to a project, to a warehouse or a yard or somewhere similar, and they're stored there until the project is ready. So that leaves scammers without paying and without a trace before you even know it's happening. Also in construction, there's a lot of pressure to meet tight deadlines, which can lead to rushed decisions and overlook security protocols, and fraudsters take advantage of these weakened systems. The construction industry is also built on trust and informal relationships. There's a lot of handshake deals, and often, credit departments and sales departments sometimes have conflicting interests or priorities or just a lack of communication. And fraudsters exploit urgency, trust, and those types of procedural gaps. So for all of these reasons, we do know that construction credit is susceptible to scams, and that's why we're here today. So jumping into what our agenda looks like, we are going to talk about 6 common examples of fraud schemes in the construction industry. We'll go through what each one looks like, what happens, some real life examples, and we'll talk about what you can look for, the red flags, and then what you can do to prevent these things from happening to you. So here are the 6 types of scams that we will focus on today. I did click to the next slide. I think it's just taking a moment, but you'll see them listed here. The first one we'll talk about is fake credit applications and identity theft, false/fake job information, fraudulent lien releases, payment diversion, loading up before bankruptcy or a sale, and then joint check diversion. So jumping into fake credit applications and identity theft. So what does this scam look like? This happens when a fraudster sets up a fake company or impersonates a legitimate contractor. They submit a credit application with stolen or fabricated information like a contractor's license or tax ID. And then the credit approval is made, a large order is placed, and by the time payment is due, the contractor is gone or insolvent. So an example, we had actually issued a fraud alert about this after conducting an investigation into a scam that was brought to their attention. In this situation, a material supplier had shipped $80,000 of HVAC equipment to a contractor who, it turned out, had used a stolen stolen CSLB license number to open that account. When the invoices went unpaid, the supplier made a license bond claim, any involvement. The licensee was able to prove that they had not placed those orders, and the supplier was at SOL. They had no one to chase down, and they had no idea where their materials were. So that's, credit card information. So the charge went through no problem. The material was handed over, but days later, the card was reported stolen. And just as in the first example, the supplier in that situation had no one to chase down and had no common red flags in both of these examples provided that would alert you that someone is trying to catfish you. The first one being rush orders from new customers, email and phone numbers that are inconsistent with, and the email address, domain, something in it is just slightly off. Maybe they have a contracting company. And it doesn't match.
Hey, Sam, I'm sorry to interrupt. The connection
your records, or doesn't match what you see on Google or other publicly available information. Sometimes there'll be no credit references or references that can't be verified on no history. For example, the Secretary of State website, when you go and you look up this company. Yeah.
Hey, Sam, I'm sorry for the interruption. The connection, it shows that your internet is really unstable, but Chris has a full bar. I know you guys are just down the hall. Is there any chance I could maybe get you to go in his office and do it from there? I'm getting messages that it's really bouncing out.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. Yeah, Chris, do you want to try, make sure your connection is good? And then if so, I can just head down to your office.
Yeah, come on down, come on over. Yeah, sorry about that. So it looks like Lori and Sam, both of your connections are.
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
Which is weird because Sam and I are literally 2 offices away from each other. So I don't know why ours is different, but yes, if I can take control of the slides, Sam, why don't you come on down here and we'll do it from my screen. And try to get through it without further issues. But it looks like at least on my screen, it says that I have full green bars. Oh, wait, there you are. Now you have full green bars. Who knows?
All right. Well, let's just watch the bars, and yeah, we can go from here. Yeah, I apologize for that. It was just bouncing in and out.
Yeah, you've got 2 orange bars.
I'm sorry about that.
We'll keep going. So I'll piggyback on a little bit what Sam said. So I'm seeing a lot of these in various shapes and sizes, and I know we've got a few right now with guarantors that are not real guarantors, or you have somebody applying for credit and they list a former partner, an enemy, a fictitious person as a guarantor. We're seeing all of these sorts of things in different shapes and sizes. And this comes back to doing our diligence on credit applications, regardless of the pressure we're getting from sales. No matter how much sales tells us how wonderful this person is, and oh my gosh, we just went to their wedding, it was fantastic. You've got to open their credit line. I mean, to be honest, I guess Sam said at the beginning, you're the gatekeeper. This is on us to try to figure out and make sure that this is legitimate. And 99 times out of 100, we're probably okay. But it's the ones that sneak through that really are the problems, and the ones that we are now dealing with, trying to figure out who's who. So yeah, I probably have 5 to 10 of them on my desk right now. And, at the end of the day, calling up the contractor who goes, I have no idea who you are or who submitted this credit app, but there was a red flag, right? And maybe one of the red flags was, oh yeah, don't ship to our business address, drop ship it somewhere else where these fraudsters could take your material and run with it, right? Like those sort of last minute changes should trigger a check, and it's not, of course, just on you. It's through your sales folks to make sure that when that sort of thing happens, doesn't pass the smell test. We got to verify to make sure before we change the address on the drop ship that this is legitimate. It's the same thing, of course, when you all see a link in your email and you're like, it doesn't smell right. like it seems right. Like it's a link that maybe, or a sender that supposedly seems familiar, but I want to make sure, double check, call that person to make sure that they actually sent me a email asking for certain information. I mean, that's the stuff that we got to do. In fact, before today's webinar, I got a call from a great client of ours saying, just want to make sure you guys are doing a webinar at 11 o'clock this morning because it looks like a phishing email. Great email. I mean, what a great proactive thing to do. Double check. When in doubt, double check, triple check, because that's some of the red flags I think that we can get out in front of and be proactive about. So Sam, when you were orange for a little bit, you were telling a good story. I don't think the last story came through, so maybe you want to just repeat yourself now that you are full green bars for whatever reason.
Hopefully it stays that way. I'm not sure what was coming through and what wasn't. Was it the second talking about?
Mm-hmm.
If you know. Okay. So in the second example, in the first example, I was talking about a situation where the CSLB had found out that a supplier had been duped because somebody submitted a credit application with a stolen CSLB license number, and then the real licensee, when the supplier went to chase them, obviously was able to prove that it wasn't them that actually had placed that order, and the person who had faked the credit application and stolen that real licensee identity, they were nowhere to be found. The materials were nowhere to be found. There was no one for the supplier to chase. And then in the second example, it was a situation where credit card information was stolen. So the payment, there were no issues with that. The payment going through, the materials were picked up immediately. And by the time
Sam, I think you're red again.
Supplier was notified. I see my connection went down.
Yeah.
But the time the supplier was notified and the card had been stolen, again, chase.
Come on down and visit me, and I think I can control this.
I'll be down in a second.
We're winging it. I like it. So yeah, and one of the things that I think is important about this, and this is just something that makes common sense, but we just don't do it in this day and age where so much is done by email and the internet. I think it does make sense for us to sometimes use the old school method of making a phone call, right? So you get the application and you decide that, this seems too good to be true. There's something maybe a little bit off, or maybe it just becomes part of your protocol. You're going to have a phone call with the person that submitted the application. And of course, you want that person that submitted the application to be an officer, director, somebody that you can verify through public record is somebody authorized to speak for the company, right? Not office manager, not receptionist, not even general manager. You want to make sure that person has the legal authority to bind the company, right? So if it's the CFO and you go on the Secretary of State's website and you see that they are the CFO, well, now how about picking up the phone or telling them, hey, we got to have a phone call where you might get a sense of whether or not this is a legitimate, person that you're talking to. Some of those checks, I think, in some of my cases would have really paid dividends. I see a comment. I'm freezing. I'm not freezing, but I see green bars. I don't know. I know it looks like our host internet, and maybe that's the issue, is down to like 1 or 2 bars, but we'll keep trying. Okay. We'll keep trying. We'll keep going. Because I see Carrie's comment that I'm good. We're still good. Okay.
I've joined Chris in his office. One comment I just want to make too on this last topic is one tip that I like to let clients know about is, obviously we always tell you to verify licenses, to use the CSLB website to check that out. In the first example I provided, that wouldn't have helped that customer that wouldn't have helped that client because the license number was legitimate and they had stolen it. But the CSLB website, you can also look up the RMO, the managing officer for that license, and a list of personnel. And I often like to look at that list of personnel. It will also list
other licenses that they are currently associated with or were formerly associated with. And even if the license is active and you can see their name there, a lot of times that history will tell you a lot about that person. Perhaps you can tell from looking at that they have started a number of businesses, a number of licenses, and those old licenses have been revoked or are expired. That kind of indicates to you that, they start these companies and they abandon them. If they've gone through 4 different companies in the last 10 years, that's not a great sign. So that's a tip that I like to tell people to check out, is the personnel list on the CSLB website.
Of course, with all the other juicy information, like whether or not they've been suspended before, maybe, one of the ones that is useful now, especially in California, and other states have it as well. Like in California, we require workers' compensation coverage, right? For every subcontractor. In fact, 2026, as of January 1st, every single subcontractor in the state of California must have workers' compensation insurance, even if they have no employees. Because, of course, there is the rampant workers' comp fraud or hiring laborers to do the work. And we try to save money by not bringing on work comp coverage. So if you see that you're dealing with an electrical contractor and it doesn't seem right, the work comp coverage they have doesn't seem appropriate, right, for like office staff, that's all they have, that's a problem. And that could speak to the viability of your customer, right? So there's lots of little tricks there. And to be honest, this is a separate 1-hour presentation on just credit apps that we do from time to time. In fact, I'm sure we'll do one for Handle at some point, where we walk through a credit app from beginning to end, all the things that you should be thinking about, all the terms and conditions that you should be having in your credit agreements, to make sure that we do the belts and suspenders approach and all this stuff. But we're just trying to point out, of course, some of the ones that you may have seen before, or just some other war stories here that might be valuable, so that you can try to minimize when this might happen to you the next time.
Yeah, we can go ahead and jump into the second pretty common scam that we see, which is false or fake job information. So for the scam, the customer will list a fake or unrelated job address, and that can prevent properly serving preliminary notices to preserve their lien and bond rights. And then payments are diverted or misapplied. So I have 2 examples to talk about, at least 2 to talk about under this one, because it is a common one that we see. And for the first one, it was a situation where we have a client who is very good about serving preliminary notices, requiring job information, and getting those pre-liens out there. They did that, but their customer failed to, likely intentionally, notify them when they were done supplying for that project. That project was over and done with, and our client kept furnishing materials to this customer of theirs, and didn't find out until it was too late to serve a prelim that half of the materials they were owed for were actually for an entirely separate project. And that customer of theirs went under, and then they had no job rights because they did not serve a prelim on that second project. And so that was a really messy situation, that whether it was false or fake job information, it was a situation that they intentionally didn't provide that job information to block lien rights. And then the second example is actually a positive story where a new customer had requested materials for a public school job. But public jobs are nice in that, taxpayers need to be kept aware of where their money is being spent. And so there's a lot of publicly available information for public jobs. And when our client went to look up this project, they couldn't find anything on it. And when the new customer was confronted with that information, they no longer needed those materials. And I don't think they were a customer any longer. So that's actually a positive story that came from just, simply even doing like a Google search or going to the public entity's website who's in charge of that project to try to find out some information, make sure you're being given even the correct address for it, let alone whether the project itself exists.
So a couple things here, Sam. Thank God we like each other.
Yeah.
So on your first story, and some people might say, well, how could you possibly prevent that? Okay, well, the number one way, of course, and it's different with every organization, I know, having been in rooms and having spoken to groups of sales with credit together and understanding the dynamics that we have. But it's really the teamwork, right? And making sure that your sales folks that are being paid a lot of money on commissions understand these job accounts and have a real relationship with the customer and communicate with them so that they have an idea of what you're doing, not in a vacuum, but what are the materials that you are furnishing to this work of improvement? What is generally going to be needed? Are there other suppliers? If you're in the electrical supply world, are there other electrical suppliers on this project, or am I the only one? How many units are there? I mean, you can get an idea, and your sales folks really should be one of your safeguards here in understanding what's needed for a particular project, and they should be the first ones that go, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. They want another $1 million of, switchgear and lighting, a lighting package. Doesn't seem like it belongs on this project. That's on them in large part to call attention to that. So if you don't have that relationship and that dialogue with your sales folks, I think that is so important. And the executives of your organization need to make sure that our sales folks are just as involved as we are at being gatekeepers in that sense. We're all on that same team. The other one that you guys can use, regardless of the state, and I know every state has a little bit different preliminary notice rule. Arizona's got the 130% rule. We don't necessarily have one in California for doing supplemental or amended liens. But remember, if you're asked to furnish additional material that goes above and beyond your preliminary notice estimate amount that you first got when you agreed to furnish, a lot of construction attorneys will tell you, oh, well, don't bother sending another prelim. You don't have to. But this goes to why we suggest that you do, because the whole purpose of a preliminary notice is to let the owner and the general contractor and the lender, the stakeholders of the project, know that you're out there and that you're furnishing approximately X number of dollars of material for their project. It allows them to spot issues, right? Exactly these types of issues. So when you do your amended preliminary notice, if your customer's balking at that, that's a red flag, right? We want to send the amended preliminary notice to the owner, lender, GC to catch a problem. If there's a problem, we want to know about it. Like, wait, why do you guys have another $1 million of materials coming to this project? We don't need them here. That would have saved several of my clients, our clients, on recent projects, if we would have just done an amended prelim, because somebody would have cried out and said, this doesn't make any sense. So that's doing an amended preliminary notice can be helpful, even if it's not required in your particular state.
Yeah.
Anything else on this? Well, I will say, so for those of you that don't have a job information sheet, look, the best source is always the general contractor's job information sheet that the general contractor circulates to all project participants. But if you don't have one, you should have your own job information form. If you don't have one, please let us know. We're happy to give you our job information form that kind of fill in the blanks, signed, hopefully by your general contractor, if not by your customer. But the higher up, the better, if you can, or both, warranting that job information. And again, that should make you feel better about the project information you're getting, but there's still a lot of things that happen on a project that warrant your attention and would, by your participation and your sales folks' participation, can hopefully prevent some of this type of fraud that we see on a regular basis.
We'll jump into the third fraud scheme that we see a lot in our world, and that's fraudulent lien waivers. So fraudsters forge or falsify conditional or unconditional lien releases to induce payment from the owner or general contractor. And then once they receive payment, they don't flow that money down to you. And actually this topic, I think the very first case I worked on with Chris was an example of this way back in 2017. We had a client who had been supplying materials to their customer. I think it was on 3 different projects. And lo and behold, their customer was falsifying lien waivers, providing those to the GC and owner, getting those payments, and they entirely absconded with all of that money. It was quite a bit since it was 3 different projects. And we didn't discover that until the client had fortunately served a prelim. So we liened those projects. And it wasn't really until we got talking to the general contractor and owner's counsel, and they brought these lien waivers to our attention, that we went back to the client and figured out that they had been doctored. So fortunately, in that situation, our client did have lien rights. The other thing we did in that situation is we held the banks accountable for cashing those joint checks without our client's signature. The language on them had been the contractor's name and the supplier's name. So those checks should not have been cashed without both signatures. And when we got copies from the bank, when we requested copies from them, they allowed them to be cashed with just the one signature. And so the two saving graces for our client in this situation were, again, the mechanics lien claims and also holding the banks accountable for cashing those checks.
Yeah, and one point here, so it's disheartening when this sort of thing happens, right? Because this is, well, they're all bad, but this one just feels really bad when someone is changing the dollars in your releases and or signing your name. And as we all know, it's so easy to do with modern technology and Adobe Pro. It's not difficult to do. And this is where being connected with your project, and even sometime to your subcontractor's dismay, if you are dealing with a subcontractor, having a connection with the GC is also important to catch some of these things. But to Sam's point, we were able to recover for that client, and we have another couple of these on our desk right now because we moved quickly. If this ever happens to you, where a joint check gets deposited without your signature, or there's some other fraud like this, you've got to move very, very quickly. The statute of limitations is extremely short on these claims in the commercial code, likely because banks and lenders have a very powerful lobby, so they were able to get the legislature to change the statute of limitation date or limit it. So you snooze, you lose on this one, but it is something that if you have the facts in front of you and can make the claims quickly and file a lawsuit quickly, then you should be able to have this other avenue of recovery. One of the things, Sam, before I forgot on the last topic on preliminary notice information and job information is, remember that in most states, the general contractor must give you preliminary notice information, even though you're not their customer. Okay, so California, Arizona, and I'm, although there's probably a lot of other states, and we're not licensed in those states, so we can't tell you. But I'm assuming that other states as well have that same duty on the general contractor. So sometimes I know subcontractors are wary about you reaching out to direct contractors directly. You're jumping over my relationship and all that. Again, when that sort of communication happens, that should give you a little bit of pause. Like, oh, this is a little bit weird where, our contractor's being so defensive here. Because again, like in the civil code in California, it specifically contemplates that suppliers will be reaching out to general contractors directly for preliminary notice information and requires them to give it to you upon request. So, you could cite that civil code section and say, look, we're just asking for our civil code notice of job information to verify it. I mean, I have some clients that do that on every single job. Not a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Not to jump around, but I'm going to jump back to the fraudulent lien waivers because I thought of another example. And maybe this seems a little bit more obvious because we're talking about it, but I do remember a project recently where it had actually been a pretty good customer for this supplier. And a little ways into one of the projects, our client had been signing waivers and releases, wet signature and scanning them over to their customer. And at one point, the customer requested a revision on one and just asked for their electronic signature, which was just the form Adobe signature, very easy to copy and paste. And months later, we get into a dispute. The general contractor and owner's counsel get involved. We find out that lien waivers had been doctored. And when you see the early version of those doctored waivers, you can see that they were copying and pasting the wet signature, but it didn't look very clean. Whereas then a couple weeks later, after the electronic signature had been provided, that was clean. And it wasn't obvious from the face of the document that it was being doctored. And so, of course, with the request that a certain waiver be amended based on, I'm not sure what that was about, but then also the request that they sign it electronically. It didn't signal anything at that point, but it came to be a red flag later. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Electronic signatures are, at least the Form Adobe ones, are easier, but then you have things like DocuSign that make it harder.
Yeah, no, for sure. They come in all different shapes and sizes, and I think the way that courts deal with a lot of these issues is they look to see who could have prevented the fraud as the culpable party. So when you identify that there's fraud going on, you've got to call it out immediately. In all 50 states, the court will look to see whether you called it out quickly. If you didn't, they're probably not going to feel bad for you. Okay, so it's important, and part of it is like, oh, well, this is a great customer of ours. They must just be going through a bad time. We feel bad for them. And then, they promise to rectify the issue. Like, please don't report it to the GC. Don't report it to the CSLB. Just wait a few weeks and we'll take care of it. And I'm giving a horror story for one that we're dealing with right now. And a few months went by. And now the client comes and says, okay, look, they're never going to be able to rectify this issue. We have to move forward. And of course, we asked, well, what did you guys do the last 4 months since you figured out that there was these forced waivers and releases? Well, we thought this client would come through, and they've had some issues. We felt bad for them, and now we're dealing with a general contractor who goes, guys, you've known about this for how long? Sorry, we have no sympathy for you, and now we're going to fight it out in court. And to be honest, not really sure where that case is going to go, because judges and courts hate that sort of game. Like, you're almost not complicit in the fraud, but you're allowing it to continue and don't call it. And that could have saved, in this case, general contractor fraud claims on other pieces of that subcontract with their customer. So the GC wasn't happy in this particular case, and we kind of understood why. So again, in these sort of cases, the court's going to be looking to see whether you called it out quickly, and also whether you should have known. Like, did you have the relationship where you, as Sam said, like, oh my gosh, you should have picked up when you saw a copy of the release that it was altered or changed. You won't always have them, but when you do, did you do something about it? And that just goes to, dotting our I's and crossing our T's.
Payment diversion. So I feel like this is an example of one, we started this presentation talking about how we're seeing an increase in these fraud schemes in both our professional and personal lives. And this is definitely one that we are seeing in both. So for payment diversion, this is when hackers intercept legitimate emails between contractors and suppliers, and they, for example, alter wire transfer details. And I provided 2 examples here. They're kind of made up examples because I thought they were better represented kind of what these schemes look like. Because in the first one, it's an internal issue. So during her first week on the job, a new controller received an email appearing to be from the company's president asking her to urgently wire funds to an account. The email was highly convincing. It replicated the president's usual language and signature. And without the established verification process, the transfer was made and it resulted in a financial loss. So I just think it's important to keep in mind that not only will these requests come from, internally, but also externally, and they can impersonate either one and cause this kind of confusion. And so in the second example, a bad actor poses as your vendor, claiming that they had a banking issue and provided new ACH details for payment. I feel like that's the example that we're a bit more used to in these payment diversion things. It's someone from outside getting impersonated. But I receive fake emails from Chris Ng all the time making requests that I shouldn't comply with.
No, I actually did want $10,000 from you yesterday. I was in Las Vegas this weekend, and I could use a little bit of some money. But yeah. So this is another one, Sam, where the courts look at, who is in the best position to spot the issue or take precautions to avoid this fraud. We actually just had an appellate case that came down like 3 months ago. I think we posted about it on LinkedIn. So, if your system got hacked, how easy was it for them to get in? But also, what did you do? What were the the prevention methods that you took. And as we have here, yes, never rely on an email alone. I will tell you, and again, we have several of these on our desk right now. All different attorneys throughout our firm are handling these for 6-7 figures. I mean, we've got a, I don't know, $8-9 million claim right now, which is crazy, right? But this is where it gets really important. Yes, we're all trained. We probably do company trainings where they test your ability to spot a phishing attack, and we've all been conditioned to sort of get better at this. But understand, when you have some hackers, and they are getting better and better, as you all know, the biggest companies in the world are getting hacked, right? It's not just our little law firm or your company, the MGMs, right? I mean, some of the biggest law firms in the world are getting hacked. So being able to know, even when you are hacked, how you can try to prevent some of this stuff. Well, part of that is, when you use the term wire in an email, the hackers, who are not monitoring every single email going in and out of your organization, but the keyword wire pops up, or settlement or payment, and the hackers now jump in and they impersonate, because they know they can jump into the email chain and try to divert wire banking information and all that. That's one of the common schemes that are the most scary, where you have this what we call social engineering. You've got a hacker that just sits there, and they may have hacked your system 6 months ago, and now when they see the term wire, and they, oh wow, here's a $2 million wire, they try to jump in and do so. That's where picking up the phone is super important. I will tell you, picking up the phone is important, but not with the telephone number that's on the last email. Okay, so we have one right now. Again, this is one of our bigger ones that we're handling for our office, where our person did everything pretty much correctly, except when they called to confirm the wire information, they called the number on the email they just received. Versus if they would have called the number on the email from 2 weeks ago, or a month ago, or a year ago, that had the legitimate number, or they would have gone online to verify the phone number for the contact, of the person, the AP person, they would have seen that the telephone number had changed mysteriously. So when they called to verify, they got the hacker, right? So is there a way you can confirm who you're actually talking to? And so there's a lot of, again, this is another 1 hour seminar just in and of itself, but a lot of things that you can do proactively. It is a scary world, no doubt. I will also tell you that there is, your organization might have what we call cyber coverage. Every one of our clients, I hope, has cyber insurance coverage. If you don't, it may be a question you ask the executives of your company. Hey, do we have cyber insurance coverage? Just wondering, because again, just like with the Uniform Commercial Code sort of things, if you are aware of a cyber intrusion, you've got to get your insurance company on board immediately. If you don't, that is usually the number one source of rejection of your cyber claims. But if they get involved, they bring on the experts, their consultants, and then they handle your claim, hopefully. And if there is a loss, pay the claim if you do things right. But again, that's all about being proactive on our end of things. But cyber insurance coverage is so important in this day and age. If your executives have any questions about cyber insurance coverage, please have them call us, and we're happy to talk them through the various products that we've seen. It's becoming the most important piece of insurance, to be quite honest, in this day and age.
On the next slide, I actually have a real world example, because when I was getting ready for this presentation, I came across this article, and I hadn't seen this before. I mean, it was from back in 2020, but it was the city of Fresno in that situation, where they became the victims of about $600,000 wired fraud scam. So someone impersonated the GC on this project and was able to induce them to send 2 separate payments, actually, to a different account, even though the arrangements at the start of the project had been physical checks. The city of Fresno had received a phone call requesting that they now pay via ACH, and this was around COVID, so I'm not sure if the hackers used that as an excuse, probably. But they were duped. The city of Fresno was duped. And there were a couple things that when the FBI did their investigation that came out of that I just wanted to mention. And it was that, one, the domain extension for the fraudulent email address ended in .us, but the GC's email domain ended in .com. So that should have been a red flag. The scammers gave multiple bank accounts that were all located in different states. That seems like a very big red flag. The scammers never provided invoices, but they only made the request to make the payment changes. So they didn't have the documents to even substantiate the request, and they never provided them. So again, another red flag. And then the last one was that when the city of Fresno responded to one of the hackers' emails, it actually returned as undeliverable.
So one common misconception that I'll try to clarify here is that, okay, well, paper checks are safer. And to be honest, I thought that until a year ago or so, and we have more and more paper checks being stolen from the mail. You may have heard this in your neighborhood, where you have people going around mailboxes and stealing people's mail. Part of it is to get a check and alter the check and cash it. And that is rampant. And in fact, your bank will tell you that it is much safer to do ACH and wire transfers than it is to deal with paper checks. So don't think that paper checks are the panacea. In fact, most of your banks, or maybe all the banks, will tell you no, that's actually paper checks are worse and are subject to more fraud than ACH and wires. We just have to do it correctly.
All right, loading up before bankruptcy or a sale. I should have also mentioned that in here. And so under this scam, a contractor or a subcontractor is in financial distress. They increase their orders right before shutting down or filing for bankruptcy. They often appear normal, still paying small invoices to keep suppliers confident. They load up on inventory or materials that they can either quickly resell or use as cash, or make themselves more appealing to a purchaser. And then they file for bankruptcy or sell the company, and your invoices are left unpaid. So the paper source bankruptcy, obviously that's not a construction case, but it mirrors what would happen in the construction realm on this one. So they filed for bankruptcy in March 2021. A lot of vendors were arguing that prior thereto, just in January and February, literally months before they filed for bankruptcy, that PaperSource had placed orders up to 4 times larger than usual during those months. And those vendors ended up being unsecured creditors in that bankruptcy. That's exactly what it would look like for us, vendors becoming unsecured creditors in these bankruptcies and receiving either zero, recovering nothing in that bankruptcy, or maybe cents on the dollar. I know we've also seen this, again, I mentioned increasing inventory, making large purchases right before a sale to make the company look more appealing to the purchaser, and the purchaser, of course, doesn't purchase the debt. And so where do your invoices stand in that situation? The company that should be holding the bag is a shell of a company, and the purchaser did purchase the debt. So that just gets to be very messy and expensive, and whether or not there is recovery for you or not, to be determined.
You would think that we only have fraud cases on our desks, but it's true. I've got several of these. In fact, this is another really just one that catches a lot of people by surprise, especially in the last couple of years, because we've been doing so well, right? We've had, 10, 11 years of continued growth in the construction supply world. So we haven't had a lot of bad debt. A lot of you probably haven't had a lot of bad debt. Your DSO is pretty manageable. Like, hey, life is good. And it has been good. Bankruptcies are ticking up. Okay, well, we haven't really felt that yet. We're feeling it now, and you're seeing more desperate people, and you are seeing this scheme, which seems counterintuitive, of a customer, maybe even a good former customer, that all of a sudden comes in and buys material, much more at a much higher level than they ever have before. And 2 ways you get in trouble here. Number one is they've exceeded their credit line, right? That they've applied for with you, and we still let the order go, or we just think it's a good thing that they've placed this order. And as Sam said, of course, they don't pay, and now the material is theirs, title is transferred, and we're stuck with no real recourse other than suing the individuals for fraud. I mean, we've done it. I've got one. We did one in Nevada recently where we sued the folks that we allege had no intention to ever pay. They loaded up an inventory with no intention to pay, and it was expensive. It was worth it because it was millions and millions of dollars, but it was expensive to litigate that case. So you don't want that case. And so understanding that loading up and a jump in sales is a red flag that needs further investigation is so important right now, not just with bankruptcies, but with a private equity sale, right? Are you really going to go after that private equity firm? Maybe, but again, it's expensive. Or assignments for benefit of creditors in those states that allow those ABCs to happen. Again, once those goods are shipped and you've invoiced, even though you're not paid, the materials aren't yours anymore. They're somebody else's assets.
And the sixth topic we talked about during the waiver and releases section. So I wonder if we should really just start going to the next part, which is kind of summarizing the red flags and what you all can do about it. This is, I guess, kind of the meat. It's more exciting to talk about the war stories and whatnot, but this is probably what you're all here for. And we have only 8 minutes left with you, so might as well jump into these spotting the red flags early and the common signs between all of these fraud schemes. So there are some credit red flags like incomplete or inconsistent information on credit applications, sudden growth or changing purchasing patterns, new requests for extended terms without reason. There are some transactional red flags like urgent or after-hour orders, unverified couriers or changed pickup locations, last-minute payment or bank instruction changes. There are behavioral red flags like excessive friendliness or pressure to just get it done, avoiding documentation or confirmation calls, and then just stories that don't add up, but it just doesn't pass the smell test. Then we can talk about some prevention strategies. These are kind of like the 5 different areas that I wanted to focus on, at least in these last 7 minutes.
And an hour seminar for each of these probably. But.
Exactly. So some prevention strategies, strengthen front-end credit verification, check out the licenses, the tips and tricks we kind of talked about throughout, verify references, identity checks, phone calls, all of that. Publicly available information is underrated. Quick Google searches can really tell you a lot about things. The Secretary of State website, the CSLB website, they're all very helpful. It's very important to train staff to detect red flags. I know we have standard protocol in place. It's a great idea to put a standard operating procedure around these things in place. I encourage you all, after we get through today, to go look at your practices and identify some of these holes and do something about it. And then from there, educate all of your people on it so you can all get on the same page. Don't skip through your protocols. Don't fast forward through them for any reason. A good customer, a large order, any of those things, they're in place for a reason and they should be followed.
I know a lot of the attendees on this webinar are like, could you guys just come in and do this seminar for our sales folks, please, and our executive team? And the answer is yes, actually. We sure can. And we've done it several times. I think it's helpful. So if you're in that type of organization where you might be able to make that recommendation, we're always happy to have this conversation because we understand the pressure that you all are under typically, and having a voice like ours where we try to put our business hat on as well, of course. We're not just, you guys are sales killers. We're worse most of the time, but we try not to be. And having this conversation is super important. And having, as Sam alluded to, this fraud response, checklist. So not just all the things that we're talking about, like here, of how you can prevent it, but what happens when you actually have fraud. And one of the things, for instance, that you may not think of is, oh my gosh, we've been duped. We are shipping we're gearing up, or it's in transit, and we know that these materials aren't going to the project where we have a job account. This is a fraudster, accounts purchaser for this company. You figure out there's an issue. Well, if you take immediate action, there's several things that you can do to try to prevent the actual loss from happening. One of the things under the commercial code is you have the ability to stop the shipment. Okay, the legal ability to say, wait, stop the shipment, and get reassurances that this is actually legitimate. Even if you're having an insecurity about it, the commercial code will say, if you have reasonable grounds for insecurity that this is a legitimate sale or that your customers can be able to pay, you have the ability to stop everything and say, we need assurances that this is legitimate and that we're going to get paid. That's under the commercial code, and I'm forgetting the code section, but it's one that I know we've presented on before. So there's a notice of reclamation, demand for reclamation, to get back the materials that have been delivered in the 10-day window prior to when you send out that demand. But you've got to do it within 10 days, right? Super, super important, super quick. I saw a question. I just realized that we have the audience chat window available to us that we can see. And I know one of you asked earlier, what's the statute of limitations on the bank claims, the claims against the bank for forging or for allowing forged joint checks to go through. So technically, it's like 1 year from when the transaction occurred, even if you don't know about it, right? So that gets a little tricky. But a lot of the Uniform Commercial Code sections and the agreements with the banks, like if you're trying to sue your bank, you've agreed to give them notice in a much shorter time, maybe 30 days. So you can't wait. It's immediate. And if it's a high enough dollar figure, you're calling us so that we can jump in and see what we can do immediately to send out the proper notices. So all this stuff is super important. And there's other things that you can do in response to the fraud, but you've got to not just spot it, but then call us, call your team, get people involved, and move quickly.
Yeah, exactly. That was what I was going to end on is, notify leadership, your council, evaluate your options, your project claims, bond claims, personal guarantees, all of that. Start putting all your ducks in a row. It's already happened. Let's figure out how to address it, how to put you in the best position going forward.
Oh yeah, here we go. That was a good slide. We could do 5 hours on this topic, to be quite honest, and 5 hours on war stories. But we'll leave you for more, so we can do a second session on fraud, one that has a little bit better connection. And sorry, Lori, it was a weird thing that I won't even blame the software. I think it probably is a weird relay thing, maybe in our offices. I don't know. We've never had the issue, but it looks like it must be that. So we'll do this again, and maybe we'll have a cleaner recording to send out to the attendees. But thank you for sticking with us and making this happen. I'll take one of the questions here from Allison earlier, and then if I miss some, Lori, feel free to just yell at us here. In most states, in California and Arizona, there is a statute, a civil code statute, which both require the direct contractor to give preliminary notice information to anyone seeking it on that job, including suppliers. So you have a legal right to communicate with the general contractor. Again, even if you're dealing with a subcontractor, and some people, some of your subs get a little bit ticked off when you go over their head. But I think the spin is, oh no, this is what we do for diligence on all of our transactions, is we double check information. It's not just you, Mr. or Mrs. Subcontractor. It is actually our verification process that we, of course, are allowed to do under the Civil Code. Here's the Civil Code section that you can read if you want further information about that. And yes, Handle or any third-party provider can also lean on and tell the GC to give them information. Again, some of that's the communication between you and your provider, because they don't want to upset relationships as well, I'm sure. So I know, it's having that dialogue and those expectations settled with your notice service to make sure that they're doing what you want them to do and not overstepping. I think that's important.